Well, hello and welcome. Well, as we know and have heard in the media over the last sort of 5 to 6 years in particular, there has been a substantial increase in screen time and internet usage by children under 9 years of age. And we've covered a lot of this here at Kiddipedia, I guess the pros and cons of this situation. But, with regards to, I guess, increased screen time usage, no one really could have predicted what we've been through and are continuing to go through with COVID-19. And I guess the whole stay-at-home era has forced us to stay in and to stay safe. But internet usage, if anything, has really been a saviour, really in keeping us connected, where we have really been physically segregated. It's enabled children to stay educated through distant learning and to stay connected with their friends and their family and stay entertained through gaming and streaming services and all that sort of stuff. But it's also enabled another demographic with opportunities, and that being online predators. And this has really raised safety risks for millions of children around the world, especially here in Australia. So spending more time on virtual platforms can leave children vulnerable to online predators. And in general, keeping kids safe and online is not a simple task. And I guess every parent would know that. And it really takes time and effort, and therefore a number of steps are really involved. So to help navigate our way through this and our new reality, we're joined today by our special guest, Michelle Derrig, author of the highly successful Protective Behaviours picture book, Only for Me. Now, Michelle is a child protection advocate and a stay-at-home mum to 4 children aged from 5 to 15. And she's also one of our partners here at Kiddipedia. Now, Michelle's book, Only for Me, is a gentle rhyming book which teaches young children that their body is private and that they have the right to protect their privacy. And since its release in July 2016, and I bet any money, Michelle, you would think that's just flown since then, but it's now sold over 13,000 copies, which is astronomical. And they've been sold not only here in Australia, but across the globe to critical acclaim by parents, educators, teachers and child protection organisations. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks, Rach. It's an absolute pleasure to be back here again. It's been a little while since we last chatted.
I know, but here we are, and in a very different world also at the moment too. And more so than anything, I guess the concerns that we're sort of facing at the moment are a little bit more concerning, I think, given the amount of time that kids are and have been spending time in lockdown. Now, you've been an expert in this space now for many years, but I'd love to know, what changes have you really experienced, if any, I guess, but I'd love to know since we went into lockdown, now that we're on the other side of it a little bit more so, but I just want to know what sort of changes did you see during that period when we were really sort of told to sort of stay indoors?
Well, sure, Rach. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that as you said, we relied on technology to connect us with the outside world, whether that was through work, for education for our kids, but also just staying connected with each other. Particularly even something that a few months ago we would never have dreamt of in some families, to sort of Skype Nan, who might just live a few blocks away, all of a sudden became a real tool for people to stay connected with their loved ones. And so I think we as parents made different decisions than what we would have normally made had it not been for COVID. So I'll just give you a little example. I had we've tried to restrict the number of social network platforms that my older girls access. But during this time, one of my daughters came to me and said that all of her friends were staying connected on a particular platform, which we previously said no to. So because we're looking at, obviously, at such a unique situation, I caved and I said, okay, because I didn't want her, we're worried about keeping the whole person healthy and mental health wise and wanting them to stay connected. I made a decision that I wouldn't have automatically or normally made. And so I said, yes, she could have this platform with conditions. And I would imagine that has been quite a common thing for families, where they would, have probably been a little bit more generous in terms of responding to their kids' requests when it comes to technology and
Yes.
social media. Even with my 5-year-old, he started kindy this year, and even within the 7 weeks he was there, he made a little best mate, and he was desperate. And I guess having older siblings, he saw the fact that they could connect online, so he wanted me to organise a FaceTime with his mate, which we did do. So I just think we were really interacting with technology in a way that we never had before, and making decisions that I wonder now whether they'll become the new norm.
Mm-hmm.
So where we've actually given permission to our kids to maybe access different platforms or apps because of COVID, are many of us going to actually then wind those back? I'm not really confident there, because I know, probably as a mum, I know it'll be very tricky for me to do that with my own children. So I think, we're really we're in a world right now probably where we've never relied on and accessed technology so much before.
Yeah, and it really did help, and is continuing to help children, I guess, sort of stay in touch with their friends, but just to reduce some form of their own anxiety, I think, and feeling like they're missing out. It was a lot for them to take on board and to digest, mentally, to understand that they couldn't see their friends and they couldn't do all these things. But, but like, in your opinion, like, why do you think online safety is more important than ever before? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think obviously the fact that our kids are accessing technology more frequently,
Mm-hmm.
the range of technologies that they're accessing is on the increase, and it's at such a rate that it's actually mind blowing. So, in this century, you would expect that the rate of technological advancement would be around about 100 years. But at the current rate that technology is advancing, it's actually more like 20,000 years worth of technological advancement in this century. That is, if it continues at the current rate that technology is changing, we will see 20,000 years worth of advancement just in this one century, in the 21st century.
So I'm just trying to have that sort of sink in. That's crazy.
It is crazy. It is really very hard to comprehend. But it really illustrates to us that this is something that as parents and carers we have to get on board with, because it's not going anywhere, and it's actually going to get trickier and harder, and it's going to be an issue that we will be adapting to probably for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and it's just the pace that it's sort of moving. And as you were just saying, the whole thing also is the fact that there are a lot of opportunistic people out there. There's something I just want to bring up for a moment, really, which is the dark web, which is something and somewhere, I guess, where predators can exchange information. Now, for someone who doesn't know what the dark web actually is, can you quickly explain what it is?
Yeah, so it's another layer of the web where people can exchange information without that being traced.
Yeah.
So it's an ideal environment for predators to actually exchange information. And what actually sort of prompted this article for me was when the major networks revealed to us that there was actually a handbook circulating the dark web that was actually, someone had specifically created it to help other predators in their efforts to target young children online during the COVID lockdown.
Yeah.
And, even though I'm very aware of the fact that these things exist in the work that I do, just hearing that it had been specifically designed to take advantage of vulnerable kids during a worldwide pandemic just made my blood boil. I was just so furious that they would, that they would prey on innocent children, but just that they would share this information with each other.
Yeah.
And actually encourage each other to use this opportunity to target kids.
Yes. So
it was hearing that just made me go, you know what, this is a topic that we can't revisit often enough.
Yep.
because I know we've covered it. You know, I'm sure there's been lots of different articles and focusing on different things through Kiddopedia and through, you know, we often hear about it in our schools and preschools. We're often being reminded about it, but I really cannot say it strongly enough that it is, we can't revisit it too often,
Yep.
because it really is a concern.
Agreed. Agreed. So just to elaborate a little bit further, for anyone that maybe hasn't heard of the dark web before, the dark web is a part of the internet that isn't visible to search engines and requires the use of like an anonymous browser called Tor to be accessed. And the dark internet is really used for illegal activities such as illegal trade, forums, media exchange, as you just said, media exchange for pedophiles and terrorists. So, and you know, which we'll speak about it in a moment, but the whole reason we're bringing this whole thing up is just so parents are aware that it's out there. It's obviously something that Joe Public doesn't know about, but we just need to bring it up in this type of discussion about online activity for children. And is there anything else? I mean, you mentioned that this is not the first set of handbook that would have been circulated on something like that before as well, which is pretty disappointing. Hey.
Yeah. I think for the average person, that, you know, it's something that it's not even on your radar, but
Yeah.
and it's something that I don't really particularly want to focus on.
No.
But I think it's
But it's just the
important that
fact
we
that
do.
the fact these predators are taking advantage
I
of
know.
vulnerable children during
Yeah.
the pandemic is what
Yeah.
you're alluding to. So
As
I
much as we
totally,
don't want to, I think it's important, that we bring it to light.
yeah,
And then we bring, I guess for me, it was as an advocate for child protection, it just awakened in me that that desire to do something to counteract the fact that this handbook was circulating the dark
yeah.
web.
So as a disclaimer, this is just
And
more so
so,
parents are aware that it's real, it exists, and I guess to be equipped with expert information and advice to help them protect their kids at all times, really. That's the whole reason we've brought it up, hey?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So we published your article, the ABC to keeping our kids safe during the COVID lockdown. For someone who hasn't read the article, can you give us a little bit of an overview and tell us what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, sure. So I think the whole, topic, I guess it depends maybe what generation you're in, but for me, I certainly didn't grow up with an iPhone, and I think I was out of school by the time we'd even heard of the internet. So I think for some of us, in particular as parents, it still can be really overwhelming. And I wanted to sort of break it down so that parents could really be aware of the different areas that we need to look at. So within each area, there are lots of different things that we can do. So I decided to frame it as the ABC, and that was simply just so that it's an easy reference for parents when they're thinking about this topic to think, have I covered these different areas?
So could you tell us a little bit more what these ABCs are?
Yeah, so for A, it's all about awareness, being aware of what your kids are up to. And I really feel for parents in this generation because it is completely new. It is not something that we, often your parenting skills are part of what has been handed down to you and the way that your parents interacted with you as a child. But this didn't exist.
Yep.
And so we've got no reference to go by. We're really, this is something that the only way that we can go forward is by educating ourselves about it.
True.
So number one, awareness. So we need to be aware of exactly what our kids are doing. What are the ways that they're accessing technology? And specifically, how do those different apps or social media networks or toys, how do they actually, how is your child interacting with those? So it's really about educating yourself as to exactly what they're doing. Okay, so once again, as a mum of 4, I know how hard that is, particularly because I have such a range of ages and the way that they're interacting with technology is very different for my 5-year-old versus my 15-year-old.
Of course.
But you really have to take that time out to be aware of what's going on in in your kids' technological journey, I guess.
Mm.
So we need to do that by having conversations with our kids. We need to, just like with Only For Me, we talk about empowering and educating our kids about body safety. Well, this is a very that element isn't really covered in the book, but this is something that we have just as much responsibility to educate our kids about. So it's about being specific once again and telling them, well, these are the sort of dangers that can exist. And of course, once again, it's in an age appropriate way, but it's about letting them know that there are predators out there, just like we'll, warn them about stranger danger and the fact that somebody could come up to them in a park. It's exactly the same. We need to specifically tell them, well, this is what someone might do, and they might try and contact you through a game or a social media network, or however they're interacting with technology, and that messaging feature is available. But the point is that they will contact you and potentially ask for inappropriate material, and also warning your kids that they're more likely to appear as another child, that they're not going to be introducing themselves as a 47-year-old male, that telling your children that that you might think that they're another little boy or another little girl, and that's the problem. But because we don't really know who we're talking to when we're talking to someone online, that unfortunately it could be a bad person.
Yes.
So we really want to specifically educate them about those dangers so that they're able to identify any sort of inappropriate contact. And then we've got also the fact that they could inadvertently come across inappropriate content. So you've got the dangers of pedophiles or predators. You've got the fact that they could inadvertently come across inappropriate content where the controls aren't necessarily in place. So for instance, and I'll talk about it a little bit more a bit later, but accessing pornography, they may not necessarily have gone out to access that, and it may not be a deliberate thing, but if things pop up that they know, once again, by talking to them, seeing anyone in naked pictures, or being really specific with them, particularly with your little ones, and we do cover that section of it in Only For Me, letting them know that that's not okay, and you need to come and tell mum or dad or whoever their trusted person is if anything like that popped up on the computer. And I guess probably less so with our little ones, but I would imagine it's at an increasingly younger age, but we've got the cyberbullying issue as well. So we want to keep them safe from all of those things. So we need to be aware. So we need to talk to them. We need to make them aware. It's about our awareness, but it's also about theirs. Yeah. And then we have to follow through, and that's where it gets tricky with just the pace of life and all the different things that we have to worry about as parents. But you do have to monitor what your kids are doing. And I, for one, can say that there are times when I haven't done this correctly. And thank God that hasn't, as far as I know, my kids have continued to stay safe. But I certainly know that there are times where I just think, okay, I really have not been doing a good job in that area. So, I'm not here to say it's easy, because I know it's not, just because we have so many different things to worry about as parents. And it's also, I think, it's about the taking the time and effort to actually learn like their games and my 10-year-old, the different games that he loves playing. Well, what opportunities are there in those games for people to connect? Can other people message him, for instance? So you really, once again, have to educate yourself about how is your child interacting with that technology. So it's all about, that awareness. So that's kind of the way of thinking about making our kids aware and us as parents being aware. And then you move on to what I called the B's, which was boundaries. And I think, it is really tricky when you have kids that make you feel like you're the big bad parent But we have to stay strong as parents, because despite what other parents might be doing, it is really important that you set those boundaries for your child, and that you don't just go along with the tide. And in some cases, I know it's actually the truth when my kids say, but mum, everyone else is doing this. But so it's really important to really stay strong in those moments, because I can guarantee you it's not everybody, but certainly there would be cases of other children sort of being able to, for instance, hop onto social media before the age, the specified age. I know that that's been a big one for my teenage girls. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought.
Talking about the boundaries,
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, the dog's just trying to get out of the door.
Okay.
Someone's let him out. So it's about enforcing those boundaries, and sometimes, you know, being the tough parent, because, you know, if you just give in, then you're actually you're potentially hurting your child. In that moment, you might feel better because you're agreeing to whatever it is that they want, you know, that they're asking access to. But in the long run, you're actually being the better parent by staying strong and setting those boundaries.
You say in the article, you know, set limits to their screen time, and that's fine. And I'm sure a lot of parents do that. Keep an open door policy when they're on their devices. This is something that's really important, I think, too. And better still, restrict them to common areas where you can actually monitor their screen. I think this is quite important, don't you think? So at least that way, if they are sort of speaking with the likes of Fortnite and those types of things to someone else online, that you can at least hear what they're sort of saying also. What are your thoughts?
But I have to say, I just know that has become increasingly challenging for me. So I think, you know, that was the advice we were getting 10 years ago, when our kids may have been sitting at a big PC and you may have only had one computer for the family, where they would potentially do some of their online work. But it is becoming much harder for kids. As the access to phones and tablets. So just to give you an idea, in Australia, almost every single teenager in Australia has access to a phone or a tablet. I would say in most cases it's a phone. I think it's 2/3 of primary school kids have access to their own device, tablet or smartphone, and 1/3 of preschoolers. So because it's a handheld device, it is so much trickier than even a laptop, for instance, because sometimes you can't even actually tell that they're on their device.
Yeah.
So it's once again just being, you know, setting those boundaries, following through on those, and doing things like having a place where everyone keeps their phones or their tablets during certain you know, periods of the day, so that you physically know that they're not in their room doing things that they shouldn't do. So the other thing that I say to parents is, as hard as it is, like quite often I've seen, I walk into a room and you straight away you see your child change the screen, whether that's the tab that they're operating on, or it's because they were supposed to be doing homework and in fact they were playing a game, or they were on social media. But I actually call my kids out on that. And I say, you know what, if you want access to technology, you are not allowed to do that. When I walk in the room, you are not allowed to change the screen that you are operating on.
Do you check their browser history then?
Yep. So you can absolutely check their browser history, and it's a trust thing. So there's got to be consequences as well. So if they do that, and if they are accessing things that they shouldn't have been, and I have had experience of that. You know, won't totally go into that story, but I had a child that was had gone against the rules that we'd set for her, so there had to be consequences. And it's tough, but you've got to follow through with them, because she was actually putting herself in danger. She bent the rules. She'd interpreted them in a way that she felt was okay, because I hadn't been really specific. But I then had to take a stand and say, because you've you've done this, you now losing technology. You're not going to have access to your phone for this period of time.
So given that you're an expert in this space, you were able to pick up on that quite quickly. But for a parent that is a working parent's got a million other things happening, which everyone does anyway, how can they? And this is exactly what we're talking about. How can parents I guess stay up to date with it, because these things can happen in the blink of an eye.
That's right. And you know what, Rach? There's no easy answer. And I have to be honest with you, it wasn't because someone else brought it to my attention. So this was to do with social media platform, and we'd given permission for them to have an account, but the account was had to be private.
Mm-hmm.
So she was only allowed to have people that she physically knew connected to her on this account.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to be not even, so-and-so's, friend of a friend. It had to be people that she physically knew. But she actually decided to create some other accounts. And so as far as I was aware, I could check that account that I thought that she was accessing, but I wasn't aware of these other accounts. And it was only through someone else telling me that I became aware of it. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it was because I was doing such a brilliant job, because unfortunately, if kids want to get around the rules, they can.
Yeah.
And they normally know more than us about how to do that and how to go about it, which probably brings me. It is, and then that just brings you back to, whenever I give a workshop on body safety and having those conversations with your kids, I finish off by talking about the importance of having just a relationship with your child where they feel connected to you, where they feel like you're available to them. And, you can only do your best, but I think, keeping that in mind as well is important.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to keep open dialogue, check as much as you can, but particularly, that's, as I said, there's a whole range of different issues on this topic, particularly depending on what age your children are.
And you mentioned controls as well. So ensure that you...
Yeah. So we've said A is for awareness, B is for setting those boundaries and sticking to them. And just to finish off on that, the final thing as well is, I think you've really got to demonstrate boundaries, your own personal boundaries to your child. If you're going to expect your kids to limit their time screen, in particular,
there's no point.
You really need to be demonstrating that as a parent.
For the next 2 hours. And you can't be on yours, but I can be on mine.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that leads us to C, which is for controls, which is where we can actually physically change the technology, change the restrictions on there and the controls on there to help protect our kids. And I can't recommend it enough, but the ESafety website, government website, is fantastic. It has lots and lots of information on there that will help parents through
show notes.
Yeah, and the links on the article as well. We can if you can pop it on, that'd be great. And they've also got, so they've got it for sort of older children, but they've also got a booklet which is for early years as well. So I'll just mention that because I think, some of the issues we're talking about has been for, probably primary school and above, but there's still things that you can do in those early years. And for that age group, all you have to do is pop on the website and they will send that out to you for free, which I think is a wonderful initiative for parent, or by the government for parents, because we need as much help as we can get. So in terms of the controls, so we can, the ESafety website talks about, there's an article there, Taming Technology, and that's one of the links that I've got in there, and that will actually talk you through the way of the sort of controls and restrictions that you can put in place.
Great.
I mentioned before, particularly with social media, the fact, knowing and once again understanding how technology works, but the difference between a private account and a public account is enormous.
Yes.
For for our young, particularly teenagers, because one is essentially a closed group where they're protected by just the people within that group, and even then, we touched on cyberbullying before. You know, there can still be risks within that group, but when we're looking at public accounts, it is an entirely different story. So you need to become aware of what the difference is, and so just saying yes to a particular platform or technology for your child isn't enough. You actually have to acquaint yourself with the different options within that app or that game, or even that toy. One thing, as I was doing the research for this, that I'd never really thought about, and I think maybe because my children are just a little bit older, but just the number of smart toys
Yes. Yep.
came through, where I'd never even considered that before, where you may set up might be something robotic, or where it's controlled by the iPad, or there's all sorts of games or smart watches, or they're handheld devices that could be have sort of GPS tracking on it, where it could actually be allowing a predator to know what area,
and the
where they
location.
are. That's right, their location. Yep, and it's sort of personal details. So, you know, to have set up the toy, it may have said, you know, what's their names, you know, what are your children's names, or again, the address details. And if they can hack into that information, then that can be very scary as well.
Yeah.
So, and I think the other thing that we've done recently, which again is we had hoped that by putting the controls and setting those boundaries for our kids, that they would respect those limitations. But we actually had to go, well, you know what, they're not adhering to what those rules are. And so we looked at our Wi-Fi settings, and we have actually had to restrict those Wi-Fi settings, which, depending on who you're with, who your provider is, but I think most of them now have that opportunity where you can actually limit the internet access. And I mean, that's the key in all of this, isn't it, Rach? It's really, it's anything, it's where that connection is to the internet. That's the door. That's opening up the dangers to our kids. So we now have set limits on devices that turn the Wi-Fi off for that particular device and that particular child much earlier in the day, so that you know, if they are in the room with a closed door, at least I know, well, they can't be accessing the internet because we've put those controls in place. So yeah.
And have you got any stories that illustrate, I guess, the dangers and consequences at all? Well, you've shared sort of one with us, which is thank you for sharing that. Do you have any others at all?
Yeah. Well, I think some of you may have remembered this if you've heard me speak before, just on the body safety issue. But we had that one little boy. Like, my whole journey started with hearing about these particular stories, and in this one case, we had a 7-year-old who had been touched inappropriately by the other 7-year-old. And when the mother contacted the other boy's mum, she then revealed to her friend that they had actually discovered their 7-year-old accessing pornography on his iPad several months prior.
As a 7-year-old?
As a 7-year-old, correct. So they hadn't put those controls in place.
How would he even know to do that, though? Like,
well, yeah, that's the thing. So I've got another example, so I'll sort of weave that into this one. We had a case, and it was several years ago now, and it was at I heard about it at a school. The kids were Googling something as innocent as baby doing a poo, was what they thought would be funny. But the way that these websites are set, they are set up to target essentially new customers. And so, and also, you know, I know that often I've heard about on church websites, the pop-ups will come up where they target people who may be vulnerable. And they do this with children as well. So where there might be a particular search that might seem funny for children, when they Googled on that, there was then the option to click on something else, and one thing led to another. And from that innocent search, they were then led on to inappropriate material. And
Which
that's
is the predator's
essentially what happened
plan
with this.
the whole time, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right. So with that 7-year-old, obviously the controls weren't in place and the awareness wasn't there. So the parents, weren't monitoring him. And the scary part was that it was over a period of weeks that he was accessing this material. But even at 7, the way that inappropriate material works is essentially it ups the ante each time. And so in that time, he had essentially, they said, almost become addicted to what he was viewing.
As a
and this is at
7-year-old.
7. And obviously those parents did everything they could at that time to then obviously ensure that he couldn't access that material, but they weren't aware that he was acting out because of what he'd been exposed to. And he was then putting other kids at risk. So that's just one example. And I mentioned before about the dangers of the private versus public accounts with social media. I had a personal friend who shared this story with me, and I'm sure they won't mind me telling you, because it is, I think it's so important when we hear about these things actually happening in real life. I think they put a whole new meaning on things. And their teenage daughter had been on a social media network, I think it was Instagram, and again, the agreement had been that it would be a private account. And she had decided to, and against her parents' wishes, had changed it to a public account. Now, I think when they looked back on it, had only been maybe, it was got a number, 2 months at the most. It was like 8 weeks, 2 months. And even in that time, that was enough time for someone to come along and start grooming her. So when I heard that, just the fact that within that short period of time of going from a private account to a public account, that she actually had a really horrendous experience of being groomed. Now, she recognised the behaviour as inappropriate, and we're talking about a 13-year-old, but she knew that she changed the account when she shouldn't have, so she didn't alert her parents to the fact of what was going on. And while she was, she wasn't encouraging what was happening, but because she was responding to this person who was being extremely forthright in the way that they were talking to her, they certainly weren't hiding what they were about. Just the fact that she was trying to deal with it on her own and say, "Don't contact me. You're a weirdo. You're a dirty old man. Why are you telling me these things?" That was enough to encourage him. And so it was only when her mother picked up her phone and saw a message that she wouldn't even repeat to me, Rach. And she knows what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And so, people are often, will come and share with me their experiences because they know that I am someone that they can talk to me about it.
Yes.
But the friend said to me, "I cannot repeat to you, Michelle, the words that he was saying to my daughter." It was that horrendous. So that was a really good wake-up call for me as well.
But the child knew that she was doing the wrong thing the whole time, and which has really sort of sparked it at the end, at the start, by the sounds of things, because she didn't admit to her parents.
Well, she wanted a public, she wanted the public account, and it all comes back down to peer pressure, and these influencers that they will see on Instagram that have so many 100,000 followers, and it's quite amazing. They can be another 14-year-old girl or boy who have suddenly done something that has made them a superstar, made them an influencer on Instagram, and they've got all these followers. And so, that's kind of like
a sense
the
of
new
power that they have,
people,
or whatever.
Yeah, and to aspire to those. So there's a whole lot of peer pressure as well in the way that you our young people interact on social media. So I think, you know, that was probably the reason why she switched her account. And, you know, it's all about the number of likes and, you know, posting those videos or those photos and
Or the
wanting that
dopamine, everything
validation.
else that it gives you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, they're just a few examples of pretty much all of those people that I've mentioned, except for that first story, but it was a friend of a friend. They're all people that I know within my circle of friends,
And as a
essentially.
parent, it must have been so alarming for her to find that on her daughter's phone then. So, I mean, how do you even sort of navigate your way out of that situation then?
Yeah, yeah. She one mistake she did make. Well, it's not necessarily a mistake, but she contacted straight away the social platform and told them what was going on, and so they removed that profile immediately. They blocked him and cancelled his account. But at the time, I said to her, if she'd gone to the police first, they may have advised her differently. And it's whether or not as a parent you want to go down that track, but there's also the opportunity for them to follow through with that particular predator.
So,
So
does it really
yeah,
start with having a conversation with your children to let them know that these things are out there and that they can happen? So God forbid that they were to do something like this without a parent knowing, at least that they would then be aware and know, well, this is wrong and I should stop doing this immediately. Like, I'm just, going back to what
yeah,
we're
I
saying at the
think
start of the chat.
that's right, which is awareness for them and awareness for us, and having those conversations. And it's also about, I think, we have a lot of pressure on us as parents, oh, well, you don't want to overstep the mark, and, your child's entitled to a certain amount of privacy.
Mm,
But at the same time, this is a whole new world, and sometimes it's actually important for us to sort of almost lay the law down and say, look, you're going to have access to these, but I also, as your parent, have the authority to check them when I need to, and
yes.
knowing their passwords. They're not going to like you for it, but but at the end of the day, it's their safety that's paramount.
Yeah.
And as parents, we often have to make the tough decisions for our children because we know what's best for them in the long run.
Yes. And overall, I guess with more time online, children could be exposed to, I guess, a new batch of like malware threats as well, because, they are downloading a whole heap of new applications at the moment. And I know that we're on the other side of lockdown now, but, we are sort of, well, now in the winter months and that sort of stuff with sort of, I guess, everyone being indoors more, and especially too because kids don't necessarily have as many of their hobbies that they can to sort of to keep them as busy and occupied. And I know, I guess, a lot of these viruses and what they sort of call ransomware, like are accessible through like YouTube. Even YouTube Kids have had some problems over the last few years, which we've known, and they've been a target for that sort of stuff. But have you had much of an experience with this, or is it mainly just with the social platforms you've been aware of these problems?
Personal stories, yeah, no, I haven't. Not in terms of kids being targeted. I have stories of where it's been adults, but obviously, yeah, that threat is out there. And once again, it's about being aware and making sure that all your protection is up to date. And it's amazing how quickly that comes around, those updates, and sometimes it's quite easy to ignore them as well because
Yeah,
we're
of
often in a
course.
hurry
But
and
you're
they
just
pop
like,
up
oh, it's the
and they
last thing.
say,
Oh, update. I'll just do that later. Do that later. I need to do this thing online now, or whatever.
yep,
But the other thing is too, is I guess some households may be borrowing sort of other computers or friends' computers. In a scenario like yourself where you've got 4 kids as well. That they, at the time of homeschooling, may have needed to sort of borrow, these older computers that weren't necessarily up to date with
up to date, yeah.
viruses and those types of things, and missing out on those types of things with that level of protection as well. So I think it's just more now, like I said, we're on the other side of it, but it's just more, I think, if we were ever to find ourselves in this situation again, that parents,
Yeah.
I guess, should maybe just be aware that they at least should have their devices up to date with antivirus and those types of things as well, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said to you, it's just my personal opinion, but I strongly believe that a lot of those allowances that we may have made during COVID when it comes to technology, it's going to be really hard to wind them back. When we've given kids access, to particularly new platforms or new
Yeah.
apps or new games. I wonder, how many parents will actually then be able to turn around to their kids and say, okay, COVID's over, we're going to delete those games or delete those apps, put on them. If they do it, I'm not, that is the best way forward. But I think for many of us, the reality is that once we've given access, it is very hard to wind things back. So,
Yeah.
I think,
Well, I mean, how do parents just sort of deal with that situation then? Do you have any tips at all? Any advice?
I think it's about taking the time out as a parent, educating yourself, as I said, on what the risks are. And I think the whole monitoring thing is really important. So if they are using those or accessing that technology in that way and it's appropriate and they are sticking to the limitations, then that could be something that you continue. But if you really take the time out and go, okay, these are our expectations, they've got to be clear.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You almost need to write them out. I love the idea of a contract for particularly my daughters, where I've actually specified these are in black and white. These are our expectations.
A written
A
contract.
contract.
Do you get them to
Yeah.
sign
it? Sorry.
Do you get them to sign it and agree to it?
Sign it. That's right.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
there's no ambiguity then as to, oh, but I thought you meant this. I thought you meant that. Or, and
That's
if you
a
sit
brilliant
down,
exercise for kids, because I mean, if they're ever going to sign any other agreements later on in their life, that they understand that, well, what is stipulated in the terms of that contract, they have to stick by them. It's not just,
yep.
that's great.
And there's consequences for that as well. So,
Good on
in
you.
this instance, if these things aren't adhered to, this is what's going to happen. So there's no surprises. There's no shock and horror. I can't believe you've taken my phone off me for a week.
No,
Because it's written
there
there in black
and
and
you've
white.
signed and agreed to it. That's awesome.
And I've just learnt that as a mum, I guess, just seeing the way that my kids have responded over time, where they get in trouble for something and they try to, wiggle their way out of it essentially. And quite often you don't realise that you're being manipulated as a parent until you went, hang on, no, that's wrong. I should have stayed strong on that point.
So what age did you sort of implement that with your kids? How
I
old were
think
they?
it's really teenagers. So, coming into year 7, so into those high school years. But I think you could do it earlier, and it just probably depends on, for me, I guess,
the child.
Yeah. So, and again, nowadays kids are accessing technology so much more than what my girls were. Sort of. So there's 10 years between my eldest and my youngest. So I can see, put it this way, with my youngest, the contract will be coming in a lot earlier.
That's fantastic. I love that.
But yeah, just to have really, and you know what else you can get them to do is to participate in that. So for them also to contribute to
the contract,
in the creation of it.
Nice.
So it's not just about
collaborative,
exactly. It's not just about you setting the rules. You can say to them, well, what other expectations do you think are fair? And it's a really good idea if you do it before you grant access to whatever it is. So with the whole mobile phone, smartphone, this was one of the things that we did before they got the phone.
Yeah.
So yeah, and as you say, it's a good practice for later on in life as well, when when they're accountable for their actions. So
well, look, if and God forbid any child was being targeted, I guess, by an online predator, what behaviours do you think parents would typically see, or what changes would they see in the child, and what should they do about it?
Look, I think the really red flag stuff is changes in a child's language or behaviour in terms of sexual behaviour and language. So if you see them, you know, hear them saying things or see them doing things that are not normal for your child, then that can be quite a big red flag
Yeah.
that something's changed for them and they've been exposed to something that perhaps that they shouldn't have. So obviously changes that's sort of, you know, very much in line with if they were being targeted by a sexual predator.
Yeah.
But then also just changes. Once I always say to people, it's about knowing your child, what's normal for your child, but just in
Yes.
terms of their anxiety levels and what's normal for them in terms of you know, their moods and their sleep patterns. So when you see, you know, if they become really irritable or, you know, it's recognizing those signs and just thinking, I wonder if, you know, is there anything else that could be happening in their lives that are prompting those behaviours. But as I said, the changes in their sexual attitudes, language and physical behaviours.
And what ages are you
Are
sort
the
of
real.
suggesting that these changes can and have sort of taken place? As early as what age?
It depends what they've been exposed to, but yeah, it can be from a really young age. You know, I'm hearing a lot of stories lately in my work with the book, just the number of young children that are being exposed to inappropriate behaviour by their peers. And I know we've talked about this before, but just in the last month, the number of people that I've been in contact with where we're talking about preschoolers. And we're talking about behaviour that no preschooler is able to come up with themselves. So they're either been exposed to that behaviour themselves physically, or in some cases it could be that they've come across inappropriate material.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it can be from a very young age,
Mm-hmm.
which is just horrendous.
Just well, look, you've given us some really incredible information today. If you were to summarize, I guess, your key points for anyone watching and listening, what would they be?
Look, I just think make it a priority. And I think it's if you just remember those ABCs, that you've got to cover it from all angles. There's no point just having the controls in place and not being aware of what you know, your kids are actually doing. And again, you know, being aware of what they're doing, but giving them free rein, that's not going to work either. So it's about those three things working to complement each other. So yeah, so just thinking of being aware, setting those boundaries and making sure that the actual controls are in place.
Mm-hmm. And there's the ESafety website, which you mentioned before, which we'll have a link in the show
Yeah,
notes too.
fabulous.
Yep.
Yeah. So
And
it's the information is out there. So it's really only about you finding the time and making it a priority. They're the only blockages there, because the information, as I said, the government's done a wonderful job of providing really specific tools to help us on that journey. So, yeah.
And the whole reason you created the book was to make this conversation about this sort of stuff easier between parents and children. And as I said at the start of the chat, you know, Only for Me is a gentle rhyming book, which does sort of give parents an easier sort of opportunity to have that conversation. But for the moment, you've also sort of got an offer for parents as well. Is that right?
That's right. So it was really, I just meant, you know, talked about the handbook that's been circulating the dark web. And so, you know, just as an advocate, I just really wanted to do something to try and counteract that evil, essentially. And so I've got a collection of articles called the Safe Kids series, and that talks parents and carers and educators through the topic of body safety. And it's normally available, it's retails at $14.95, or you can buy it as a package with a copy of Only for Me, but I decided that during this COVID lockdown period that I just wanted to give that away for free. So if anyone does head to my website, which is onlyforme.com.au, and you click on the Safe Kids series, it will give you the coupon code right there, which you just pop in, and it will ask you for some details, so your email address and your address, but there'll be no payment gateway that will pop up. So
Wonderful.
you then get an automatic email that will then give you that access to that digital resource.
That's wonderful. And we've got that code in the article, and we'll have that also in the show notes as well. So yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful chat, not for any other reason, but that we just hopefully have helped as many families as possible. It's a really hard subject to talk about, as we've said in all of our other previous chats, but it's one that needs to be had, and more of it. So thank you so much for your time. And if parents have got any other questions and want to contact you directly, whereabouts can they find you?
Absolutely. So if they jump on the website or email me directly, which is contact@onlyforme.com.au.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. We'll speak.
Yeah, and I've actually got, sorry, I'll just give a little plug. I'm doing some webinars with the COVID-19. I often run parent workshops through schools or preschools, churches, any organisations essentially where I can get a group of parents together. But obviously I'm not able to book those in at the moment, and so I started my my first webinar last Thursday, which went really well, and so so we've got another one booked in, and I'll be doing those on a fairly regular basis, certainly while I'm unable to speak face to face. So that's just another opportunity for parents if they want to know more.
And they go directly to your website to find that information then?
Not on the website, but if they go to my Facebook page, they will be able to keep up to date with the latest event or webinar.
Okay, great. We'll make sure we've got a link to your Facebook page as well in the notes. Love the chat.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, we'll chat again soon. As we said, this is something that we need to keep speaking about, so, and more of it. So we'll take care. Give my love to your kids.
You too.
We'll speak soon. Okay, bye.
See you later. Thanks,
Bye.
Rach. Bye-bye.